Welcome to Lost at 3 a.m. Put your phone down, close your eyes, and let this be the last video you hear tonight. Relax, breathe, and let's begin. Some legends are born, others are forged through fire. And then there are those who spend years in the shadows, waiting for the moment when destiny will finally call their name. This is the story of Aragorn, a man who walked Middle-earth not as a king, but as a ranger. A lone wanderer with a burden heavier than any sword he carried. He was a leader before he ever wore a crown, a warrior before he ever claimed his throne, and a legend long before his name was sung in victory. But Aragorn's journey wasn't just about reclaiming a kingdom, it was about honor, sacrifice, and the weight of fate. He was the last hope of a dying bloodline, the heir to a throne that had sat empty for centuries, and the one man who could unite the free peoples of Middle-earth against the growing shadow of Mordor. And yet, he was also just a man with doubts, with fears, with a heart torn between duty and desire, a man who spent decades running from his destiny before finally accepting it. But how did Aragorn go from a ranger of the north to the King of Gondor, from a shadowy protector to the leader of the greatest battle in Middle-earth's history? Tonight, we'll travel through time, through war, through legend, uncovering the life of the man who turned the tide against Sauron and led Middle-earth into a new age. So step into the world of swords and sorcery, of kingdoms and crowns, of courage and destiny, because this is the story of Aragorn, the once and future king. Long before he became a king, before he even took the name Strider, Aragorn was born into a legacy that stretched back thousands of years, a bloodline of warriors, rulers, and fallen heroes. His story didn't begin with him. It began with Isildur, the man who cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand. Aragorn was born Aragorn II, the rightful heir to the throne of Gondor, but he never knew his father. His father, Arathorn II, was the chieftain of the Dunedain, the last remnants of the great kingdom of Arnor. But before Aragorn was even 2 years old, Arathorn was killed in battle, leaving his son fatherless before he could even understand his true destiny. To protect him from the enemies that would seek to destroy his bloodline, Aragorn was taken to Rivendell, where he was raised in secrecy under the care of Elrond, Lord of the Elves. There, he learned history, language, and the art of warfare, trained by the greatest warriors and scholars of Middle-earth. But he was never told the truth about who he really was. It wasn't until he was 20 years old that Elrond finally revealed his identity to him, that he was the heir of Isildur, the last hope of the Dunedain, and the rightful king of Gondor. With this revelation came a heavy burden. He was given the Ring of Barahir, a symbol of his lineage, and the shards of Narsil, the broken sword of his ancestor, waiting to be reforged when the time was right. But Aragorn did not rush to claim his throne. Instead, he chose a different path, a path of exile, of wandering, of learning the world he was destined to rule. He took up the name Strider and lived as a ranger of the north, fighting in the shadows, watching over the lands of men, and preparing for a future he was not yet ready to face. His destiny was written in history, but Aragorn was not a man who would let fate control him. He knew that to be a true king, one must first prove themselves worthy. And so, his journey as a leader began, not in a castle, not on a throne, but in the wild, where he would spend decades shaping himself into the man Middle-earth would one day call its king. Before Aragorn could be a king, before he could even consider reclaiming his throne, he had to become something else. A guardian of the wilds, a shadow protecting those who never knew his name. He took up the mantle of a ranger of the north, a title both feared and forgotten by the people of Middle-earth. To them, he was just Strider, a mysterious wanderer who appeared in the dark corners of taverns and vanished just as quickly. For years, Aragorn lived in exile, embracing the life of a warrior with no home. He traveled across Middle-earth, learning its secrets, defending its people, and honing his skills in combat, survival, and leadership. While kings ruled from thrones, Aragorn protected the borders of the free world from the growing darkness. Most never realized the Rangers were even there. The people of Bree and the lands beyond saw them as dangerous outsiders, men of secrecy and shadow. They whispered rumors about them, but never knew who was keeping their homes safe from the dangers of the wild. Aragorn wasn't just a ranger in name, he became a silent guardian of the Shire, ensuring the hobbits lived in peace, free from the horrors of the outside world. Long before he ever met Frodo Baggins, he had been watching over his ancestors, ensuring that the bloodline that would one day carry the One Ring remained unbroken. But even this wasn't enough. Aragorn didn't just wander the north, he fought alongside the great kingdoms of men, disguising his true identity. Under the name Thorongil, he served in the armies of Rohan and Gondor, proving himself in battle, earning the respect of men who never knew they were following their true king. He even led a daring raid against the corsairs of Umbar, striking a blow against Sauron's allies long before the War of the Ring began. Yet through it all, he never revealed himself, never stepped forward to claim what was rightfully his. Why? Because Aragorn knew that a king is not simply born into power, he must earn it. He could have marched into Gondor and declared his lineage, but he didn't. He could have demanded the throne, but he refused. Instead, he chose to walk the hardest path, testing himself, waiting for the moment when Middle-earth would truly need him. For decades, he carried the weight of his destiny in silence, watching, waiting, until the day finally came when fate would call him out of the shadows, when the Ring of Power would resurface, and the world would need more than a ranger. It would need a king. In a world of war, prophecy, and destiny, Aragorn had one thing that grounded him. Arwen Undomil, the Evenstar of the elves. Their love was not just a romance, but a tale of devotion, sacrifice, and an impossible choice that shaped the fate of Middle-earth. Arwen was the daughter of Elrond, the Lord of Rivendell, and one of the last High Elves in Middle-earth. With her immortal beauty and wisdom, she was compared to Luthien Tinuviel, the legendary elven princess who once fell in love with a mortal man. When Aragorn first met Arwen, he was just a young man living in Rivendell, unaware of his full destiny. The moment he saw her walking in the starlit woods of Lothlorien, he believed he was looking upon a vision of elvenkind's greatest beauty. To him, she was something beyond his reach, a light that could never belong to a mere mortal. But their love grew in secret. Aragorn, though he was the heir of Isildur, knew that loving Arwen meant asking her to give up everything: her people, her immortality, her place among the elves. And Elrond knew it too. He refused to allow their union, telling Aragorn that he was not yet worthy of Arwen's love. If he truly wished to marry her, he would have to prove himself, not just as a man, but as the King of Gondor, the one who would reunite the broken kingdoms of men. Only then, Elrond said, could Arwen's fate be tied to his. This was no small thing. If Arwen chose Aragorn, she would be choosing mortality, giving up her elven immortality to share a short human life with him. It was a choice no other living elf would make, for while Aragorn's time on Middle-earth was fleeting, Arwen could have lived forever, sailing across the sea to the Undying Lands. But she made her choice. During Aragorn's long years as a ranger, Arwen remained his source of hope. She wove for him the banner of Elendil, a symbol of his destiny, and pledged herself to him in the glades of Lothlorien, where she gave him the Evenstar, a jewel representing her love and her choice to forsake immortality. And so, their love became more than just a romance. It became a test of faith, a sacrifice, a legend. Aragorn fought not just for Gondor, not just to defeat Sauron, but for the future he could have with Arwen. But nothing was certain. He still had to prove himself, to claim his throne, to fulfill the prophecy of his people. Only then would Arwen's fate be sealed. For while kings are often chosen by birthright, Aragorn knew that his future, his love, his throne, his very place in history, was something he would have to earn. When Aragorn first crossed paths with Frodo Baggins in the dark corners of the Prancing Pony in Bree, he wasn't dressed as a king, nor did he carry himself as one. He was Strider, a hooded ranger lurking in the shadows, watching from afar. To Frodo and his friends, he was a mystery, dangerous, untrustworthy, and a man who spoke in riddles. But this was the moment fate finally caught up with him. When the hobbits came under attack from the Nazgul, Aragorn revealed his true nature. Not as a rogue, but as a protector, a guide, and a warrior who had been watching over the Shire for years without their knowledge. With sword in hand and wisdom beyond their understanding, he led them away from danger, guiding them across the wilderness toward Rivendell. This journey wasn't just about keeping Frodo safe. It was a test of Aragorn's leadership. He wasn't following orders. He was making the decisions, bearing the responsibility for their survival, and stepping into the role he had spent his entire life avoiding. And when the Council of Elrond convened, when the fate of Middle-earth rested on one impossible quest, Aragorn made his choice. He joined the Fellowship of the Ring, not as a king demanding his throne, but as a soldier, a protector, and a man willing to walk the same path of suffering as those around him. The journey that followed tested him in ways he had never imagined. He fought the forces of Saruman, braved the mines of Moria, and stood against the Uruk-hai who hunted the ring. Every step of the way, he had a choice, to lead or to let fear hold him back. But the moment that defined him came on the banks of the Anduin, when Boromir fell to the corruption of the ring. When Boromir tried to take it from Frodo, Aragorn had a chance to claim it himself. He could have taken the power, seized the destiny that lay before him, and used the ring to reclaim his throne. But he didn't. Instead, he did what no other man before him had done. He let Frodo go, resisting the temptation of power, proving that he was not just a warrior, but a true leader. And when Boromir fell in battle, pierced by Uruk-hai arrows, it was Aragorn who held him in his last moments, who honored him with the words, "Be at peace, son of Gondor." That was the moment Aragorn truly began his path to kingship, not by taking, but by choosing to protect, to guide, and to stand for something greater than himself. The Fellowship was broken, but Aragorn was not. His journey was far from over. The battles ahead would be greater than anything he had faced before. And for the first time, Aragorn was ready to face them, not as Strider the Ranger, but as the man who would one day unite the world of men. For years, Aragorn had lived in the shadows, watching over Middle-earth as a ranger, a warrior, and a protector. But after the breaking of the Fellowship, there was no more hiding. The time had come for him to step into the light, to claim his destiny, or let it slip away forever. With Frodo and Sam heading toward Mount Doom, Aragorn knew that the rest of the world could not simply stand by and wait. If Sauron turned his full force against Gondor, Frodo's quest would end before it even began. Middle-earth needed a leader, and Aragorn could no longer deny that the role belonged to him. But before he could claim the throne, he had to prove himself on the battlefield. At Helm's Deep, he stood alongside King Theoden of Rohan, leading a desperate defense against Saruman's army of 10,000 Uruk-hai. It was here that Aragorn's true leadership emerged, rallying the men of Rohan when all seemed lost, charging into battle with nothing but hope and a sword. When he looked death in the eyes, he did not waver, because kings do not flee. Yet, even after that victory, the path ahead was unclear. Gondor had not had a king for nearly 1,000 years. Denethor, the steward of Gondor, still ruled, and he would not welcome the return of Isildur's heir. Aragorn knew that his claim to the throne could not come from blood alone. It had to be earned through action. He needed to bring Gondor a victory so great, so undeniable, that no one could question his right to rule. And that meant taking the greatest gamble of his life. With Gondor on the brink of destruction, Aragorn made a decision that no ordinary man would have made. To seek out an army long dead, men cursed by the sins of their past, bound to the world as restless spirits. He would walk the paths of the dead, a road where none had ever returned. and demand that the army of the dead fulfill their ancient oath to fight for Gondor. This was not a quest of brute strength. It was a test of courage, of will, of a king's ability to command loyalty not just from the living, but from the dead. Because if he succeeded, Gondor would have its greatest weapon. And if he failed, then Aragorn's bloodline, his destiny, and Middle-earth itself would be lost forever. There are moments in history when a leader must walk into darkness, not knowing if they will ever return. For Aragorn, that moment came when he stepped onto the paths of the dead, a cursed road haunted by the restless spirits of men who had broken their oaths long ago. This was no ordinary journey. It was a gamble, a desperate move that no King of Gondor had ever dared attempt. The prophecy said that only the true heir of Isildur could command the dead to fight, and Aragorn had no proof that the spirits would listen. He had only faith and the weight of destiny on his shoulders. As Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli entered the dark passage beneath the mountains, the air grew cold, the shadows thickened, and the whispers of the dead filled the cavern. These were the men of Dunharrow, warriors who had sworn to fight for Gondor, but had betrayed their oath when the time came. As punishment, they were cursed to wander the mountains, unable to find peace. When they emerged into the heart of the dead men's domain, the spirits surrounded them, hundreds of ghostly warriors, their faces twisted in eternal regret. And then came their king, the spectral leader of the damned, staring at Aragorn with hollow eyes. Who dares disturb the king of the dead? Most men would have fled. Even great warriors would have fallen to fear. But Aragorn stood his ground. He did not beg. He did not waver. Instead, he spoke with the voice of a king. I summon you to fulfill your oath. Fight for me, and I will release you from this curse. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the spirits laughed. To them, he was just another fool who thought he could command the dead. But then, Aragorn did something that no man before him had done. He drew Anduril, the reforged blade of Isildur, the sword that had once cut the ring from Sauron's hand. The moment the dead saw it, their laughter died, because in that instant, they knew. The prophecy had come true. Aragorn was the heir of Isildur, and for the first time in an age, the dead had a king to follow. With their ghostly army behind him, Aragorn marched to Pelagir, where Sauron's corsairs, an invading fleet, prepared to strike Gondor's already weakened defences. The corsairs never saw their doom coming. The dead swept through their ranks, an unstoppable force of vengeance wiping out Sauron's fleet in a matter of moments. When the battle was over, Aragorn released the dead from their curse, proving that he was not just a king in name, but a leader of honour. He had done the impossible. He had won a war before it even began. And now, with a fleet of ships under his command, he set sail for Minas Tirith, not as a ranger, not as Strider, but as the man who would save Gondor and claim his throne. As Aragorn's fleet sailed toward Minas Tirith, the great city of Gondor was already drowning in fire and blood. Sauron's forces had arrived in full strength, and the White City stood on the brink of destruction. The defenders, led by Gandalf and the soldiers of Gondor, were barely holding on. The skies were darkened by fell beasts carrying the Nazgul, and the gates of the city had been shattered by the monstrous battering ram Grond. At that moment, hope was all but lost. But then, a black fleet appeared on the horizon. At first, the men of Gondor despaired, believing that Sauron's corsairs had come to finish them off. But as the ships drew closer, a lone figure stood at the bow, sword gleaming, banner flying. A king had come to claim his kingdom. Aragorn had returned. With the army of the dead, Aragorn led a charge unlike any battle in Middle-earth's history. The ghostly warriors, fueled by vengeance, swept through the enemy ranks, cutting down orcs, trolls, and Easterlings as if they were nothing. The forces of Mordor, so sure of their victory, fell into chaos. The tide had turned, but it wasn't just the dead that won the battle. Aragorn fought on the front lines, wielding Anduril, the reforged sword of kings, cutting through Sauron's minions with the strength of a man who had finally accepted his destiny. When the battle was won, and the dead had fulfilled their oath, Aragorn released them from their curse, proving once again that he was not a ruler of tyranny, but a leader of honor. But this victory was not the end. As Minas Tirith burned and the wounded were carried from the battlefield, Aragorn refused to enter the city as a king. He knew that he had not yet fully earned that right. Instead, he tended to the wounded, using the ancient healing knowledge of his ancestors. It was then that the people of Gondor began to whisper what had long been foretold. The hands of the king are the hands of a healer. The war was far from over. Sauron still lived, and the ring had yet to be destroyed. Aragorn had won a battle, but the true test of his kingship was still to come. Because now, the fate of Middle-earth rested on one last stand, the final march against the Dark Lord himself. Victory at Minas Tirith had given Middle-earth a fleeting hope, but Sauron was far from defeated. His armies were still vast, his eye still searching, and his darkness still stretching across the land. But Aragorn knew one thing. If Frodo and Sam were to succeed in destroying the One Ring, they needed time. Time that only a final distraction could give them. So he made a choice that only a true king would make. He would lead the armies of men directly to the Black Gate of Mordor, knowing full well that it could mean their deaths. He would stand before Sauron's forces, outnumbered 1,000 to 1, and challenge the Dark Lord himself. As they marched toward the shadowed wastelands of Mordor, doubt crept into the hearts of even the bravest warriors. How could they possibly stand against such overwhelming darkness? And that was when Aragorn spoke, standing before his army, with the weight of centuries on his shoulders. He delivered one of the greatest speeches in Middle-earth's history. A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields, when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. This day we fight. It was not just a speech, it was a declaration. A king does not ask others to follow him into battle. He leads them himself. And so, with sword in hand, Aragorn charged first, running into the mouth of doom itself. What followed was one of the most impossible battles in history. As the Black Gate opened, Sauron's legions poured out, tens of thousands of orcs, trolls, and monstrous beasts. The forces of men were hopelessly outnumbered, yet they fought not for victory, but for a chance. One last chance to keep Sauron's eye away from Frodo. And then, in the midst of battle, Aragorn did something that no man before him had dared. He looked straight into the darkness, straight into the great eye of Sauron, and he did not flinch. In that moment, it was not just a ranger, not just a warrior, but a king standing against the greatest evil the world had ever known. And then, everything changed. Far away, deep within the fires of Mount Doom, Frodo and Sam completed their impossible task. The ring, Sauron's very soul, was destroyed. The Dark Tower crumbled. The armies of Mordor collapsed into chaos and ruin. Aragorn had led his people into battle not to win by force, but to buy just enough time for destiny to unfold. And he had done it. Sauron was defeated. The war was over, and Middle-earth stood on the brink of a new age. One where Gondor would once again have a king. The battle was won. Sauron was gone, his armies scattered, and the darkness that had threatened Middle-earth for so long had finally been lifted. But for Aragorn, there was still one final step to take. He had fought wars, led armies, and proved himself in every way imaginable. But there was one thing he had never done. He had never claimed his throne. For centuries, Gondor had been ruled by stewards, men who kept the kingdom alive but never wore the crown. And though he was the heir of Isildur, Aragorn had never forced his claim, never demanded power. But now, the people of Gondor were ready for their king. As he walked through the streets of Minas Tirith, now free from the shadow of war, the people bowed before him. But in true Aragorn fashion, he did not see himself as their superior. He was their servant, their protector, their leader. And so before anything else, he repaid the greatest debt of all. At the gates of the city, Aragorn saw the four hobbits, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin standing among the crowd. These were the ones who had done what no warrior, no army, no king had ever done before. They had walked into Mordor, faced the impossible, and saved the world. And as they started to bow before him, Aragorn stopped them. With a simple, powerful truth, he spoke the words, "My friends, you bow to no one." And then the King of Gondor himself bowed before them, a gesture of honor, humility, and recognition of the true heroes of Middle-earth. Then, at last, came his coronation. Dressed in the robes of his ancestors, wearing the crown of Elendil, Aragorn stood before his people, not as Strider, not as a ranger, but as Elessar, the rightful King of Gondor. And as he took his first steps as ruler, he sang the ancient elven words of Númenor, a reminder that his reign was not just for men, but for all free peoples of Middle-earth. But there was one final moment that mattered most. For years, Aragorn had fought for more than just his throne. He had fought for the love of Arwen, who had chosen to give up her immortality to be with him. And in that moment, as he stood among his people, she appeared. For a brief second, the warrior, the leader, the king disappeared, and all that remained was a man who had waited a lifetime for the woman he loved. And when she stood before him, they finally shared the embrace that had been written in fate from the very beginning. This was the true victory, not just the defeat of Sauron, not just the return of the king, but the beginning of a new age of peace and hope. And so Aragorn ruled, not as a conqueror, but as a healer, a protector, and a king who had walked through fire to earn his place in history. The last lines of his story were not about war, but about peace, the kind that comes only when a king does not seek power, but serves his people. And with that, the legend of Aragorn was no longer just a prophecy or a dream. It was fulfilled. Thank you for spending your night with Lost at 3 a.m. Sweet dreams, and we'll see you next time.